Okay, welcome along to part 2 of the psychopathology phobias revision. So we're on to the treating phobias now, and we have got a couple of options for treatments of phobias when we are looking particularly at the behavioural explanation for phobias, one of which is systematic desensitization, and there's a little example of it. So we've got, think of the string, think of a worm, handle a worm, think of a snake, handle a snake, have a snake on your neck. So that that kind of gradual step-by-step finally ending up with you facing your phobia, your fear. So systematic desensitization. And the other option is flooding. So flooding is a much more dramatic treatment. Here's an example, a Far Side cartoon, where Professor Gallagher and his controversial technique of simultaneously confronting the fear of heights, snakes, and the dark. So there he is. He's put his patient into a box, dangling it out high in a dark box filled with snakes, because flooding is the idea that you are put into the situation with no gradual build-up, and you just are stuck in that situation until you realise that it's okay and that your phobic stimulus is not going to kill you. Okay, hopefully no psychologist would be quite that mean to do that to you. So systematic desensitization, a little bit more about it. It's a behavioural therapy designed to gradually reduce phobic anxiety. So it's this gradual reduction, a systematic gradual reduction through classical conditioning. The sufferer learns to relax in the presence of the phobic stimulus. So they learn these relaxation techniques, and then they learn a new response. So they see this phobic stimulus, and they pair it with this feeling of calm that they will get through their gradual relaxation techniques that they have learned. So instead of fear and anxiety when they see this phobic stimulus, they instead learn to associate it with this fear of, with this feeling of calm and relaxation. This is called counter conditioning. It is impossible to be relaxed and afraid at the same time. So one emotion prevents the other. Reciprocal inhibition, this is called. So if you have learnt to feel calm and relaxed because of all the techniques that you've learnt, you cannot then feel afraid at the same time as feeling calm and relaxed because of this reciprocal inhibition. So there's three processes involved in systematic desensitization. The first one is the anxiety hierarchy. Second one is the relaxation, and the third one is exposure. The anxiety hierarchy is the list of situations that provoke anxiety in order from the least to the most frightening. So it's got an example here. The least frightening thing, if you have arachnophobia, maybe to be thinking about a spider. You only get a 10 fear rating here. You then look at a photo of a spider, a little bit more scary. Look at a real spider in a closed box. Hold the box with the spider. Let the spider crawl on your desk. Let it crawl on your shoe. Let it crawl on your trouser leg. Let it crawl on your sleeve. And then let it crawl on your arm. And that's obviously the kind of big fear factor there. So they put into a rank, a hierarchy, the anxiety-provoking things with that phobic stimulus. Then the second part to the systematic desensitization is the relaxation part, and this is where you learn the breathing techniques, the imagery techniques. So imagine yourself lying on a beach and kind of almost putting yourself into a completely different place in your mind, learning meditation. We did a little bit of work in our lesson where we talked about thinking about tensing and releasing each different muscle in your body from your toes all the way up. And also sometimes they might use medication like Valium. Valium is a relaxant, so that is another way that they may try to relax you when you're going through your anxiety hierarchy. And then finally, the third part is the exposure. So after working through the hierarchy, The final part is that you are exposed to the stimulus while you are in a relaxed state, and it happens over several sessions, working up the hierarchy. And they say that treatment is successful when the patient can stay in a relaxed state, even faced with their worst fear, or what was their worst fear at the beginning. So at some point there would be somebody who was scared of snakes might be as chilled out as this lady is with her great big snakes on her. So evaluation of systematic desensitization, well, it is extremely useful. It's been used and is used a lot in the treatment of phobias. Gilroy found that 42 patients treated for arachnophobia were less fearful afterwards, and for a long time afterwards. So it shows that the effects are long lasting, and it's a successful treatment. It's suitable for a range of people. Sometimes flooding and cognitive behavioural therapy aren't suitable, but for people with learning difficulties or severe anxiety, or for children, systematic desensitization does work. So it is more suitable for a range of patients because it's much more gradual. Patients prefer it to flooding. It's more ethical than flooding. We'll look at flooding in a minute. It's also less daunting and traumatic, and it's not quite as scary because there is that gradual build-up, and you can go as slowly as you want to or you need to. People enjoy the relaxation part of it as well. Pairing those two together with that counter conditioning is something that's relaxing and enjoyable for patients. And it is not something that tends to have a very high attrition rate. Attrition is when people will leave whatever it may be. So in this case, it's leave a treatment. You can also have subject attrition in a study where people will leave a study, but in this case, attrition means that people aren't leaving through the treatment. So it's got not a very high attrition rate, and people will do it because it is a gradual build-up and they don't refuse, and therefore it is a very sensible and popular option, systematic desensitization. So what was the other option? Flooding. Here we have a lovely picture of a man with a tarantula on his face, because basically flooding is just you face your fear head on. You are immediately exposed to it. Yes, you've been taught some relaxation techniques beforehand so that you can kind of try and calm yourself down, but there's no gradual build-up, there's no hierarchy. It's not, there you go, see a picture of a spider now, etc., etc. It is bam, there's a spider, deal with it, cope with it. And you are immersed in your fear. That's why it's called flooding. You are flooded in your fear. And there's no option of any kind of avoidance behaviour. You can't avoid this phobic stimulus. And what happens is that the patient learns that the phobic stimulus is harmless, because they start with these huge levels of fear and anxiety, and the adrenaline will be pumping around their body, but that can't be maintained. So gradually they learn to work out that the phobic stimulus is not actually going to kill them, it's not going to harm them, and they start feeling this new feeling of calm that they then associate with the phobic stimulus. The whole thing can be done in perhaps even just 1 2 to 3 hour session, but we also have to think very carefully about the ethical issues with flooding, because it can be very traumatic. So individuals that want to do it have to give informed consent. So that does mean that for some patients this is not a good therapy to do. For example, for children who might not necessarily understand what they're signing up for, it wouldn't be a good therapy for them. It would be too traumatic. So a little bit of evaluation of flooding. Well, it's cost effective in that it's quick. You could be cured of your phobia in one short 2 to 3 hour session if you can cope with it. As there's no gradual build-up, patients get straight into it, and they learn very quickly that the object of their phobia is not as frightening as they thought it was. so it does mean that the patient can be cured of their phobia pretty quickly, and in a cost-effective way, because if it's only going to cost you 2 to 3 hour session of therapy, that's pretty quick. You don't have to keep going again and again and again. So that's all well and good if you can cope with it, if you can stick to it. And that's the next point. It is so traumatic for the patient, and there is a high level of attrition, because so many people who try the flooding technique actually find that they just cannot cope with it and they leave. Shipley actually found that 0.2% had panic attacks when they went through flooding, although that is not a hugely high number. So it's only really very effective if you can cope with the stress and the trauma of it. And a couple of other little extra evaluation points if you wanted to put in. Oh, actually, there we go. I did do them like that. It is less effective for complex phobias. So phobias such as social phobias that have got more cognitive aspects, that are about kind of, scared of standing up in front of people in case what people are going to think of me. Are people going to think I'm stupid? Are people going to think I'm whatever? So it's all those thoughts. That's the problem with the social phobias, and therefore social phobias really need a more cognitive-based therapy to tackle that irrational thinking. So flooding doesn't really work for that. The other final evaluation point is that it could actually, some people say that flooding could just result in symptom substitution. So rather than working out why somebody has a phobia, it actually just removes the symptoms of that phobia. So you might be able to no longer be scared of spiders, but have you got rid of the cause of that phobia that could be deep down inside you? If you just get rid of the symptoms of being scared of spiders, and you could go through flooding, get rid of your fear of spiders, and then a couple of weeks later that fear be substituted for a fear of snakes, for example. So actually it does make flooding a less attractive form of therapy, for the fact that it might just make you swap one phobia for another, and you'd be going through that horrendous trauma to then actually not really fully cure yourself. So there we have a revision of all of the evaluation and treatments of phobias. So hopefully you feel a bit more confident with that now.